All right, hello. I think we're going to get started. I have 1 o'clock on my phone, so hopefully we're all on the same page. Um, for the people that I don't know, my name is Dan Bessie. I'm on the board. This is my second year on the board. I'm the board treasurer, and I've been on the Ways and Means Committee for a long time. So this idea concept came from that group, and I'll talk about that in a second. This town hall has had a gestation period of about 20 months, so it's taken a while to us to get to where we are, but I think we're in a really good place. So we have a number of folks here with us today. Obviously, Rich Augustiniak, our community manager. We have a number of board members here. John Matuka, Cecil Heath, Ronnie Phillips, Lisa. Oh, Chris came in, Chris Hale. Am I missing anybody? All right, and then we have a number of people from the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Finance Committee, chaired by Leslie McElroy. Brent Reed's in the back. Don Barber's here. So that's good news for me since when you ask questions and I get stumped, I have lots of resources to kind of turn to. Yeah. Um, so again, thank you for taking time on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I know there's a lot going on with golf tournaments, fishing tournaments, and lots of other things on a beautiful May afternoon, high school graduation parties. So the concept behind this is, as I said, a number of months ago, we're in the Ways and Means Committee and we started talking about, one of the challenges is there's lots of information around Kiowa's finances, but it's really hard to get it communicated in a way that people appreciate and understand. Not everyone's going to take each month's communique and go through the financials and try to tie them together to understand, what's changed, what's different. I think I know one person that did that, and now he's on the Ways and Means Committee, which is great. So we want to continue to kind of push information to you in a way that hopefully it's easy to understand and is helpful in your discussions around what's going on with Kiowa. So the first thing that we started is last December. Rich put an article in the communique around how we do budgeting for the POA. So it really was a great article that went through kind of that process to help people understand what we do and how we do it. And that turned into a series of articles. So I think we have with the articles in the communique this month around KPIs, I'll include that, key performance indicators, really the measures for the community, the public kind of top line measures that we all look at. And then there was another one in there around kind of the structural challenges with Kiowa expenses and how that's different than you might think it is for you and your personal household and reserve funds and all that. So we have pretty much an article a month going out in the communique. I know it's usually in the back, so you have to go through all the pictures and advertisements, whatever, but there is a lot of good information there. So then we're like, okay, not everyone's going to read what comes out in constant contact. Not everyone's going to think about what's in the communique and then be able from month to month to loop it together. Why don't we create a town hall that tries to get the basics? So we titled this Your Community, Your Dollars. It's really Iowa Finances 101. So that's the intent today, is to make sure everyone has the ground level information. And then if you have all specific questions around certain topics, obviously we can go through them. So here's the agenda for today. On your left side, you can see, what are we trying to do? Help you understand where your dues go, what reserves funds are, why do we have them, what's the difference between them, restricted and unrestricted. Where are we on our reserve funds? There's a lot of questions around that. And then the last piece that I just brought up is like why dues go up despite everything that the POA and the board is trying to do to restrain those costs. So we're going to do that, with those 6 agenda items on the right. Yeah, so we're going to do what do we spend money on? What is it? What's the POA before we kind of dive into the numbers? Right. This, for anyone that's been here for more than a month, this is pretty self-evident, but you think about Rich's job, Scott Manning in the back, who I forgot to point out, Public Works Director, job is to think about how do we maintain and fund all these things. 22 miles of road, the lake, a 18-hole golf course that gets 50,000 rounds of play every year. I mean, for a private golf course, that's a huge, huge number of rounds. Um, security, gated 24/7, the lodge, the pavilion, and then all the common areas that Scott and team needs to think about and maintain. So you start thinking about all these different buckets and all the things that we need to do to support these buckets. So that's when we start talking about finances, we start thinking about all these different items. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. This is the fee sheet for this year. I added in the new reserve fund at the bottom, the road reserve fund. So I took garbage collection out. So this isn't exactly what you pay. The reason why I took garbage collection out, it's just a complete pass through. The POA collects the money and just gives it to the vendor according to, and the cost is, whatever, as assigned by that contract. And there is a inflator in there from year to year based on inflation. So we really don't have a lot of input and involvement in that except around negotiating those contracts. But as you can see, the operations budget, which includes money that we want to spend on new things, the capital asset requisition fund, is going up 5% this year. And then the other reserve funds, restricted reserve funds, went up, RC, ARF and golf course replacement funds went up 3%. The lake management fund went up 5%, or what is that, 72 cents. And now we have the new road reserve fund. And I'll talk to you about why that is really a saving grace for some of these other projects or other reserve funds. So I talk in a lot of acronyms. I deal with this stuff every day, much to Rich and Crystal Hilton, who's our controller's chagrin. So I have, so I might talk about something, you might say, Dan, I have no idea what that is. Raise your hand, I'll slow down, I'll explain. There'll definitely be opportunity for comments at the end, but or questions at the end. If you have any questions in the meantime to help your understanding of this process, happy to do it. So here at the high level is what the dues go to. So lodge, food and beverage, you can see the gold-ish color is this year, the green color is 2025. Lodged, this is just the expense side. I didn't put the revenue side. And for lodge, that's important. Jeremy and team has done a phenomenal job, I think, improving the quality, but also improving the number of people that come to the lodge, the number of tickets, the average cost of or average value of the tickets that get written. So he's really closed the gap between how much revenue comes in the lodge and how much expenses are. In years past, we supplemented the lodge, I mean, probably at the highest level, $200,000-300,000 a year. So that, the lodge is an amenity. It's never before recently was never intended to try to break even. Now we're thinking about it a little differently. This year, we're, the revenue side has gone up dramatically. So we've closed that gap around lodge revenue and lodge expenses so that you don't, even though there's a lot of expenses, the amount of money, POA money that goes into that is much, much less. So golf is probably the biggest, the 18-hole golf course is the biggest expense that we have, net expense that we have. We'll talk more detail around that. Then you can see public works, security. Security went down in 26 because we moved the compliance officer out of security. I forget where it went to, but went to public works. Okay, so you see a bump in public works and you see a decrement in security. So that's really just, yes, ma'am. Why is the lake down there? So public works would be like if we're repairing, putting riprap up or repairing, something. Yeah. Well, it's just not a cost center, right? So it's the things that we do here. These are the people, the organizations that do the work, and therefore they're getting paid, and that's where the cost is. So we don't do it. So the golf course is broken out because Brian and his team, that's the expense, the equipment, the chemicals or fertilizer, all that goes under golf. But things like parks, common area maintenance, all is kind of under public works. All right. And we can, we have this in lots of detail if you want it. No, that makes sense. That's a good question.
And then just a note too is when you went into their budget and people again think things are all wrapped together, this is just our O&M budget. So it's just that portion of your dues, just the operation and maintenance. It doesn't include the reserve funds like lake management and others. This is strictly
Good
just the
point.
operation and maintenance portion.
Right. Exactly. All right. And the teal ones are really the POA staff, what it costs to run, this from an organizational perspective. You see salary and benefits, office and professional. There's lots of different components in there that make up the overall number. And I knew I was going to get a question of what those are, so I wrote them down. So yeah, salaries is exactly what you would think, salary, overtime, Social Security, insurance, unemployment insurance, workman comp insurance, retirement benefits. Those kind of go under salary and benefits. Insurance is exactly what you think. It's not the employee related insurance, but it's property insurance, cyber insurance, whatever that may be. Technology, communications, all the IT support, website, we put document printing underneath there. And then everything else really goes under office, professional services. The contract labor, like Jim Adams, goes underneath there. All the audit costs, postage costs, fire protection costs, property taxes that we have to pay. All that goes underneath kind of the office and professional piece. Sanitation is that pass through that we talked about, that the money comes into the POA and immediately goes back out to the garbage collection business. You can see a slight uptick, and that's the cost, inflation increase that's built into that contract. So those are the main buckets that we have for where the money is spent, where the money was spent last year and where it's being spent this year. Yes, ma'am. Right. Oh, did I really? I apologize to both Jim Adams and Jeff Fox. It's Jim Fox is a contractor. Right.
It's like we started a project manager to help with some of the projects. That was Jim Fox. Also, we had some increases in our legal, our attorney fees, certain things like that increased over the years.
But it's not, we didn't hire a bunch of folks, I guess. Is that part of the question? Well, we didn't reduce for security. It was really moving the person from security to public works. And roads, we spent everything we had to spend on roads. So, it wasn't like we made that conscious decision. It was, this is what we have. And what isn't in there, and we'll talk about in a second, is how much money for roads are coming out of the Asset Replacement Reserve Fund. So most of the money spent on roads up in the recent years up till this year is coming from the R fund. So it's not coming from O&M. Well, see, you're good. So Vicky is right. Um, the the initiation fee money is discretionary money for the board to decide what they want to use it for. In the last 2 years, the board has decided to put 100% of the money into roads. So we got $250,000 from the R fund. Last year, I think it was 230 or 240 from the initiation fee, and then 100-ish from the operations budget. Well, if yeah, that's a good question.
It would be more of a breakout too, because we have a lakes and parks section, but that's all melded together too. So when you talk about, we have money for doing trails and we have money for buoys, it's all kind of wrapped up in one. We could split it out again, but then you'd be you could do that for everything and start breaking things more and more
And
out. Yeah.
that's even if you did the operations budget that way, it wouldn't include the money from the lake management fund that gets spent every year. So it gets a little bit complicated from that perspective. So I guess we could say all in how much we spend on the golf course, all in how much should we spend on, you know, the lodge, and lodge is a little easier, but so you can see that. But between, we'd have to look through Scott's budget from a public works perspective, figure out of all the things he's doing, how much is lake related, then look at what Cecil's lake management, lake group is doing or recommending from the lake management fund. So it could be done. We
Yeah.
just traditionally haven't done it. And from an operations perspective, it hasn't felt a need to do it. But I know from a member perspective, there's how much we spend on golf, how much we spend on the lake, how much we spend on, you know, the amenities like the pavilion. And that's, I think that's
Yeah.
probably part of what your question is,
I
right?
mean, some of us go back. This is just the operation and maintenance. Like when we, allocate the funds and you're saying we do get funds from different areas to do like anything involved in a lake comes from a few different areas. So we could say like how much is the lake, but all that money's coming from different funds. And this is, our budget. Like when we start like your home budget, this is your budget that you start with what you're spending every year. When you're talking about some of the things for the lake or some of the things for the roads, like this is what we bank on every year. The lake management may or may not spend money on the lake, depending on if they're going to do a silt removal of the ponds, this or that. The initiation fee, next year, we might not spend any of that money on the roads. The initiation fee may go to play for playgrounds or something else. So those are dedicated funds specific for certain items, either lakes, roads, initiation fees, anything the board wants to supplement O&M with. So it's hard to, like when you say how much is the lake, you have to look at it in certain ways. First, what's your budget, and then where it's coming from all the reserve funds.
But to your point, we could do that math. All the data's there. So I know Leslie, you have a point. Correct. Right. Yeah, you would have to make an assumption how much time does Scott's folks work on the lake? How much is their salary? Then try to do an estimate there. I mean, to Leslie's point, we don't say this person is only working on roads, this person's only cutting grass. So you'd have to do a little bit of estimation to get there. You could, I'm not saying you couldn't, but from an operational perspective, it's not something that has been necessary up till now. But I understand why someone would be interested in it. All right. Just going to jump right into some of this stuff. Kind of things that I've heard, we've, on the board have heard, and, some people will like to post on Facebook or next door, whether that's good or bad, I'm not sure. But, POA has a lot of money. Why aren't we spending it? So if you look in the communique and you look at total amount of money in the bank, there's a fair amount of money there, absolutely. And we'll get to this in a second, but the vast majority of that money is in reserve funds, and there's $500,000 or $600,000 is set aside that's been donated for the part three that sits in the POA's bank account. So almost all of that money is earmarked for, the lake asset replacement. Um, you know, what am I missing? CDRF is to buy new things. A lot of that's going towards pickleball. So that money is all allocated. If you look at cash flow at the POA level, we have basically 1 month of cash flow in the bank account. So for all the POA operations money, because, and that's okay because the vast majority of people pay their dues and pay them on time. So it's a guaranteed fairly guaranteed source of revenue. If I was running a business and I had 1 month of cash flow, I would be fired as the finance guy immediately because even any nonprofit, that's, unheard of if you're waiting for money from external sources. Just cutting expenses. We have plenty of money. We don't need dues increases. Again, most of the money is set aside for the future in the reserve funds. But you think about how costs have gone up, and I have a slide on that in a minute. You know, you know, the POA has done a really nice job of curbing expenses, but there's just structural things that we all get. Our property insurance went up. POA's property insurance went up. Healthcare insurance goes up. You know, gas goes up, diesel goes up. You know, all those things you can't control. They're just structural built in. So the discretionary stuff, like how many security guys people do we have, you know, how many public works folks do we have, you know, that is, you know, things that you know, you could cut, but then you're also cutting services provided to all of y'all. Stop saving for the reserves, just push that money into the day to day. You know, that, you know, means that, you know, we can't just simply, you know, we have no money to replace things as they break. And things you never think about. There's a controller for the 18-hole golf course. Um, you know, there was a control panel for the 18-hole golf course irrigation. That was $90,000. I'm like, what? How's that possible be 90? And, you know, it just, that's how much it costs. So to me, if you don't, and that money came out of, to replace it, came out of the asset replacement reserve fund. If we didn't have that money, all of a sudden we'd be going out, knocking on doors saying, hey, we can't irrigate the golf course. Can you all raise, you know, a few dollars to replace this, you know, control panel? In the meantime, right, the golf course would be withering and dying away. So, you know, so the person that invented, or people that invented ARF and some of these other reserve funds were genius in that they were thinking about Kiowa's long-term future, and not thinking about, oh, you know, we don't have to worry about those things down the road. It just, we'll figure it out then. And Kiowa used to be that way. I know how many guys know Corky Cahoon. He'll tell you when we had to do payday loans to pay salary, and we had to do multiple assessments just for doing day-to-day stuff, buying equipment back in the day. Thankfully, we're not there anymore. Um, sure. No, but of the six, well, right, it's not in a reserve fund. It is in the POA budget. So if you look at how much money the POA has as total assets, there's roughly five or $600,000 that's been donated to the par three. Well, donated to the POA, earmarked for the par three, so that it shows in the bank account statement, but it's not a restricted reserve fund. It's through the donation process. It's dedicated to the par three. Does that make sense? So it's no, and this comes up, and I'll hit this too. You know, people are like, "Oh, we're spending POA money on the par three." No, not $1 of POA money has been spent on the par three, and there's no plan to spend a dollar on the par three. That's the par three group. I give them tons of credit that, you know, they built a $2 million amenity with zero cost to the POA, and they've raised five or $600,000 to maintain it going forward without spending any POA money. Mr. S. Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because when we were building the par three, the company that was building that, you know, we were talking to them about the you know, the driving range. We wanted to redesign it and improve it. They're like, well, we already have the equipment here, so we cut $50,000 off the bill, if we just keep on going and work on the driving range after that. So it saves a significant amount of money. Our great friends and good partners at First State Bank donated another $100,000, 100,000 to the par three, 100,000 to the driving range. So off the start, we had $150,000 in donations or savings, for doing the par three, you know, the way we did it. So, yeah, I think the par three has generated lots of goodness for the community. So, and they're, you know, the walking trails are being worked on as we speak. So golf course and lodge are joining our budget. As we talked about, the golf course is used incredibly. We do get about $80,000 net in guest fees from that. The lodge has changed dramatically. There's been 3 months over the last 9, I think, where the lodge is, more than broken even. So, you know, that was unheard of in the past. So again, kudos to the lodge committee and Ronnie and Jeremy and his staff, for improving that. Some other things that come up, I don't play golf. I don't have a boat. I don't go to the lodge. Why do I have to pay for them? This comes up a lot more than I ever thought it would. But when you moved into Kiowa, you moved into a POA and you literally signed a contract that we all own everything equally and we'll all pay for things equally. So, to undo that, one is undoing the contract that you already signed. So and it would take a lot of different work to do that, change our covenants, change our bylaws. You would have to get 2/3 of our members to agree to that. So it's that's just what you signed up for when you got here. How do I understand the financials? So there is a treasurer's report that goes out every month in constant contact. I review it at the board meeting. Cecil is having more and more involved in that as the assistant treasurer. But if you ever have questions, you know, Dan Bessie or dbessie@verizon.net, 106 Wampum Cove. Send me an email, call me. My name, phone number, emails in the back of the communique. As some people know, I love talking about this stuff, probably talking about it too much. I have people that are like, okay, which, yeah, okay, I get it. So happy to do it anytime, anywhere. And then, we talked about reserve funds. We'll talk about it more, but why do we have multiple reserve funds? Why don't we just have a big pot of money? And two reasons. One, if we have money that's set aside in a reserve fund for roads or golf or the lake, what we have. We know what our expenses are intended or should be, or planned to be. And then we know what the gaps are, if any. And, if we have one big pocket of money or pool of money, right, and we can spend it any way we want, we just say, all right, I, you know, the 9 members of the board are anti-golf, so let's spend every bit on all the reserve funds on roads or everything on the lake, or vice versa. So this not only provides greater transparency for all of you, so you can see what the liabilities are and what assets we have against those liabilities, but it also is a way to make sure that we're spending money on the things that we need to spend money on: the lake, the roads, um, the golf course, the 18-hole golf course. All right, does that make sense? The other thing I've heard a lot, is, well, Vicky, yeah, it's a good question. So we've done it different ways for different items. So when the golf course reserve fund was created, we looked at everything in ARF and understood what's that percentage of liability that was in ARF that was golf course related. And we took that bucket of money and you moved it over to the golf course reserve fund to seed it. Not nearly enough, but that's how it went. And then when you look at when that was created, we did the same percentage of the dues. So, roughly a third of the money that was going to ARF now goes to the golf course reserve fund, and roughly a third of the money that was in the ARF went to the golf course reserve fund. Road fund, we took a different approach in that we were taking $250,000 a year out of ARF, and ARF was going to go bust. So it's just a matter of when, based on spending and inflation. So we decided the most prudent course of action is to start the road reserve funds completely separate. So we didn't take any money out of ARF. The good news is separating golf and roads from ARF now makes ARF actually in a much better position. The ability, the forecast for it to go bust is much lower than it was before. Unfortunately, like the golf course reserve fund, if we have a big ticket item like greens replacement or other things, there's never going to be enough money, or at least in my lifetime at Kiowa, there's not going to be enough money to, pay for those things. So we have to make a tough decision of if we want to replace the greens, how are we going to pay for it? Is that an assessment? Is that something else? Correct. So kitchen equipment, if we need a new plow attachment for one of the tractors, new security vehicles, all those things. I mean, there's a physical list, an Excel list that is audited that goes through every single piece of equipment at Kiowa that's worth more than $2,500 or the replacement value is more than $2,500. So that's part of what the Ways and Means Committee does is, review, not technically audit, but look at all those things. And if something is comes up that, oh, we budgeted $25,000 for this, whatever it is that we need to replace, but it's really going to cost $35,000, then Rich needs to come to the Ways and Means Committee with his case around why does that make sense? We have a discussion around, do we really need it now? Can it get pushed off? And then if it's something that we really need now and we need to spend more than what was allocated, then it needs to go to the board to vote on as far as can we do this? Should we do this going forward? Does that make sense, Vicky? Um, there's not there are not official minutes on most of the committees, but if you want to sit down and go through our schedule and you can see what's done, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, so it's out there, but but it's hard to go through for the uninitiated. All right, Don. Third Monday of the month at 3:30 or 4. 3:30. Yeah, that's a good point, Don. More than welcome. Drink some caffeine before you come. That would be my advice. But yeah, we get into really fun things, in there, like what interest rate assumption are we going to use for the next year's budget? Jim, then Walt. Yeah. Well, what doesn't show on this slide is that uh, the benefits to the employees went down and what the employees paid is different. So they save money not just by negotiating harder, but actually making some hard decisions around what got covered, what doesn't get covered. That, is tough when you're working with employees. All right, you used to have this, now you don't. Especially for us when we have, in some areas, turnover rates that are higher than you'd ever want. Sorry, Jim, I got cut off. Most likely it would be a community vote. There are provisions if it's something's a big emergency, all of a sudden we need to spend $1 million on the dam because something dramatic has happened, then the board could do something in an emergency way, but it's really intended for everyone to weigh in on. So, we've done it in the past. What was the last one was the bridge, right? Yeah, number 3 bridge was the last one that was done, and was that 17? All right. So 9 years ago. All right. So we talked about a lot of these things. We talked about healthcare. We talked about the lodge. You know, we talked about some of the things around recruiting. We tried to use different outside services to recruit. Spent $40,000 trying to use some of these websites and other places to find candidates, and it didn't help us at all. So we cut that out. Went back to doing it ourselves, saving $40,000. And I talked about within Ways and Means, while POA, then Ways and Means, looks at everything that's scheduled to be replaced. And there's a discussion around, do we really truly need to do it? And many, many things are pushed off. And then if we do it, how much is the budgeted asset, replacement value? And is that, is the replacement cost the same as the budgeted cost? And go from there. So there's a lot of discussion about this all day, every day in the POA, within Ways and Means, and then within the board. Oops, going backwards. All right, this is the slide I kind of teased earlier. Last fall, I kind of went through and kind of looked at, expenses within our area. So the left side in that was supposed to be red, looks more orange to me, but is how much inflation has gone up from January 2015 through March of 2025. So that roughly 10-year period. This is for just the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it went up roughly 40%. The dues during that time went up 30.4% for Kiowa. And that, if you remember, if you were here back then, the fiscal year for the POA was July through June. So dues or fees would go up on July 1st. I used the June numbers to capture the bigger variance, but you can see the amount that dues went up is 30% below what inflation went up. So that's a testament to Rich, his team, the prior community managers, and tighten their belt to doing what's right. Um, on the right hand side, just for reference, I put the Social Security cost of living increases, which the government uses a different inflation number or index. This is on the left side is CPI. They use something called the Consumer Purchasing Expenditure Index, which theoretically has more behavioral kind of pieces in there that when prices go up, you don't buy high grade gas, you buy low grade gas, you don't go on the family driving trips, those kind of things. They think that's more accurate for this situation. So you can see some of the things on the bottom. We've talked about this concept around, well, we just tighten our belt, we can keep dues flat. But when you start to see how much insurance is, property insurance has gone up, well, waters, I wasn't going to bring that up. How much of water has increased. I mean, the last year's water increase was $100,000 hit to the POA budget that we didn't have budgeted. So we had to figure out where to cut $100,000. So in this concept that, people that have been here for over X number of years or over a certain age should have their dues frozen, which I appreciate, that concept. But again, within our documents, the way we have it set up, we all own Kiowa equally. We all have to pay equally. So to do that differently, we'd have to get, not have certain people pay for the golf course. It would be going back, redoing the covenants, maybe redoing the plat covenants, and then all the way down into bylaws. So the likelihood of that happening is slim. As nice of an idea is that it. All right, we've talked a little bit about operations money versus reserve money. So just to hit that again, the green side on the left is what we use from operations. So we have operations and CARF. CARF is discretionary money. It's a reserve fund, but it's really money that comes out of the dues that goes to the operations budget, and then the board pulls out for capital acquisition. So spending money on new things or refurbishing things that we have. Could we change that and say we could taking less out of CARF or less of the operations money into CARF, so we have less money to spend on building and refurbishing? Yes, that's a decision the board can make, but there's not a laundry list of things out there that we're trying to do that would come underneath that bucket, front entrance being probably the most expensive one that's still out there. Then on the right-hand side, it's really the future things we talked about: asset replacement funds, the vehicles and equipment, the golf course reserve fund, it's also golf course stuff, the lake management fund. CDRF is Community Development Reserve Fund, and that's pretty much done. It was built when Dan Bush and the POA were selling lots of those kind of odds and end lots that we had. There was like 100-ish lots, many of which didn't qualify to build a house on, but we're like, hey, might as well see if someone wants to buy them. So the house adjacent might want it just to have a little bigger yard. And almost all of those lots have been sold. So that revenue went into this community development fund. But now there's only 2 lots left that potentially could be sold. And those are the ones on the curve near the old driving range. So we didn't sell those for a number of reasons, but one of which, I don't think anyone wanted to buy a house that was in the danger zone of the driving range. So they weren't very attractive. But now that the driving range moved, that discussion can come up again if that's what people want. So here we are back in detail. Asset reserve fund, we talked about right now, that's the biggest fund. We'll talk about how the funding level of that is in a second. We have the Lake Management Fund and the Golf Course Reserve Fund, and then the new Road Reserve Fund that just started getting money into it last month. So there's nothing really there. Then we talked about, we have the Capital Asset Reserve Fund, or CARF. That is really a subcomponent of the operations budget, to do things like the driving range, the walking trail at Low Wolf Park, those kind of things. And then, as I said, there's some money in the CDRF from lot sales in the past. A big chunk of that is going towards pickleball. I think 140,000 or more. $75,000 are going towards pickleball. So there's still some money there, for other things. So that money though won't be going up, or won't be going much. Yes, Vicky. Yeah, good question. And it's, par three, 100% donated money. Pickleball donated $140,000. The POA is putting $175,000 in. So each one is different. I know that for playgrounds, there's some discussions around raising money. Um, you know, the driving range, we got $100,000 from First State Bank, which again was tremendous. So, those things this is Dan Bessie, I shouldn't say this. James Tidwell, the lawyer, tells me not to say these things, and I'm staring at Ronnie. So he's just, he's giving me that like, don't do it. But Dan Bessie's opinion is, having people feel passionate about a project and donate is great. But is that the reason why a project should get approved or not approved? In my personal opinion, 1 of 9, no. So, so I think we can find money for things like the playgrounds. It depends on what you want. I think there's still a discussion out there. Do you want $300,000 worth of playground upgrades? You want $150,000 playground upgrades? You want to do west side first, east side second? So we still have to work through all of that. But, do we have $300,000 to do that? Probably not, but there's probably something in there we can do. Yes, ma'am. That's a good question. Well, I'm glad you asked that question that way, because these are not binary decisions. It wasn't like, do we want playgrounds or do we want pickleball? Yeah, we want all of them. Some people asked, like, why are we doing walking trails and not working on the playground? Well, the walking trail decision was done a year and a half ago. Yeah. So, and that was part of the master plan. So, so it wasn't either or. It was, okay, we want this and we want this and we want this. But they all weren't discussed at the same time. I think the need for the playgrounds is much more clear, today than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. So it's more of an emerging thing. So to answer your question, the passion for the people on the par three and wanting that for as amenity, they knew that trying to get the community to weigh in and say, we want to spend $1 million on the par three was probably a tough one. And they took it on their own shoulders to raise all the money. And again, I give them unbelievable amount of kudos to think that, and Jim Hess was part of that, Leslie was part of that, Jeff Hecker, Jim Marfis, Dean McElroy. I don't even know how many hundreds of hours they spent, fundraising, knocking on doors, not only within Kiowa, but also to some of our great community partners like First State Bank that donated money. So they felt so strongly that they wanted to get it done that they made the decision that they could raise all the money. And the way that vote was done around allowing the par three, it says that the par three is distinct. All money has to come from donations. No POA money can be spent on that. Yeah, and that's everything comes up and we look at it differently. So was there enough motivation for motivation's the wrong word, but community interest in updating pickleball and getting off the tennis court and having a better piece? Yeah, to me, it's all looking at these things individually and what's the benefit to the community. Do I think we're going to get as a community $175,000 worth of value by having pickleball courts, given how crazy that cult following of pickleball has become? Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's all part of it. Each one of these things is looked at individually. Will we upgrade the playgrounds? In my opinion, again, Dan Bessie, 1 of 9. Yes, absolutely. It's still like, what are we going to do? How much is it going to cost? Those things still have to be ironed out. I mean, I know that group has looked at different things, but there's been no formal RFP, no formal kind of proposals out there yet. All right, Vicky. Sure. Chris, she's calling you a squeaky wheel. No, sorry. That's the board. So we're in a very fortunate position that we have 150 volunteers roughly that work on the 19 different committees that we have at Kiowa, and they bring that information to the board, and the board has to then decide what's the best for the community and how do you order those things. So it would be really hard to say Lake Management Fund or Lake Committee, we need you to factor in playgrounds in your decision. Do you think this lake activity is more important, less important than playground? That's just impossible. But the people foolish enough to run for the board and serve on the board, that's that's part of what that's what we're on the hook for. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Being the chair of the long range planning, I should have thought of that. But we have done long range plans every couple of years, and we did a master plan 5 years ago. So those things, and part of that was surveys and focus groups and all that. So there's that input from that perspective. So yeah, and then the board has to make the tough decisions. Chris? So so I think that the pickleball guys learned great things from the par 3 folks. There's a process that works so that and a lot of the work is upfront. It's not coming to the board and say I want $200,000 for this, because the board will say, what are you talking about? No. But if it's worked and you have you know multiple the relevant committees, be it land use or whatever, Parks and Rec, all coming together, great, then it's all much more uh powerful discussion. Leslie? Right. So that's a good point. So if you look in the asset replacement reserve fund, there was roughly $50,000 in earmarked for upgrading the playgrounds. So we spent 20,000 roughly on the new, whatever you want to call it, mulch, turf. Yeah. And getting rid of some things that we needed to get rid of to make it up to safety standard. So there's $30,000 ish that are there now. So, we if we want a $200,000 improvement to the playgrounds, we need to figure out how to get that 170-ish thousand dollars. Yes, ma'am. Mhm. So two parts to that answer. So the bylaw vote that the community passed had no POA money can be spent on the par three. So it's either going to come from donations or it's not going to happen. So as I said, they've done a phenomenal job and they've raised five or $600,000 just towards future masons. Is that going to get them forever? No. We're thinking like $100 to $200,000 a year in maintenance costs. So so the people behind the par three need to continue to raise money. At some point, if they say, all right, we're done raising money and that five or $600,000 goes away, we put cattle back out there like we had before. Yeah. So, I mean, the exception of that is yeah, it's all donations today. You could do another community vote, change the bylaw so that you could spend POA money on it, but that's what it would take. It would take 2/3 of the community to vote for that. Correct. Right. I mean, different levels of cost. I agree. But my again, well, again, par three is not expensive to the POA. Pickleball is again not dramatically expensive once it's built. I mean, it's concrete. And so, but my point is back to the where we, that were a few minutes ago is these decisions aren't binary. We didn't say, do we want pickleball or playgrounds? We didn't say, do we want the par three guys to move ahead or do we want, improved fishing piers, right? These things, the pickleball discussion literally started 3+ years ago and has moved on. Yeah, right. And the same with the walking trail. The number one thing in the last long range planning survey was walking trails. So walking trails in Little Wolf Park, was one that the board prioritized. So pickleball was third, I think, on the list in the last survey. So that got prioritized. So, so it wasn't like, we're saying against something. It was really trying to do what the majority of members wanted. And again, hindsight's 2020. But these were decisions made with the facts and circumstances, to use my lawyer terms, at the time.
And just to, say a lot of things, all these things are choices and tough choices by the board. I mean, going to ARF, we have about $18 million in liabilities in just ARF alone. That's spaced out over like 20 years. And then we have, 20 some things on our CARF list that are on our list. That's about a $4 million worth of items. So we would love to do all these things all at once and there is money, but how do you choose what to do when? You have to be very prudent. You have to, the member surveys, all the information you get. So everything the board chooses to do is a really, really hard choice.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to, all right, sorry, Vicky, go ahead. Correct. Correct. Well, with any committee, it's a fleet of volunteers doing the best they can, right? I think they all should get 100% pay raises. So you go up to zero from zero. I just think about, some of the committees we have, like the Rules Committee. George Owen has run that committee for a long time. That committee's done great work. That has to be the hardest committee in Kiowa to serve on. And, they spend dozens and dozens of hours, and what the payoff they get is someone in Facebook saying that they have no idea what they're doing. And, it's just really, really hard. So I think to answer your question more directly, long range planning and having that plan balanced with the master plan is how it all starts. That gets fed to the board, all the committees, and we go from there. And to the point Lisa brought up, was a great one, is that we looked at the priorities that are identified in there, and we start seeing how we could do it. It's not always number one goes first, number two goes second. If we can get 3 and 4 off the list because they're easier or cheaper, great, let's do that. But walking trails is one. We're getting better walking trails we have are much improved from where they were, and now we have new walking trails at Little Wolf Park. So pickleball was number 3. I think part 3 was the one that was in there last time, and that was happening. So really, we got the first and second taken care of. Yeah, we're trying to work on that. And so one of the things we did, and I know I'm going off cycle, and I'll be quick, is we pulled out all the satisfaction stuff from the long range planning, because we would do it every second year, every third year. It's really hard to impossible to get good data doing it that way. And the questions, to your point, depending who drafted it, changed. So we're now trying to be more consistent with that, so we can get more data that's more consistent, so we can drive better decisions. So now we have SAT every 6 months, and that's great. So I think with the long-term planning, or committee survey, or next time we do it, we're going to try to figure out, all right, what's the basis, what's going to stay the same every time we do it, and what's going to rotate as different topics come up. We do. Last time we did it, it was just under 40%, but it's hard because we don't restrict it like the bylaws where it's 1 vote per lot. It's any member of the community can do it. So if you're, um, 1,470 lots, 2 people per lot on average, that's 2,800 people. So, what's the percentage of? Maybe there's more, but do you want to count only 18 to plus or 21 plus? So it gets a little kinky, but 30 to 40. No, we would do it on paper as well. So very, very, very little adoption on paper, thankfully, because someone then has to input it. But, and again, with anything like the bylaws, you can go to the POA office, someone can help you. I'll come to your house with my laptop and do it out. If it's helpful, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, we do. And because, we're running up on time here, but leases for some surveys, we'll talk about that. That's different, right? They can't vote on the bylaws, but some of these other things they can. Right, exactly. So back to a different point. If you look at how much money we have in the golf course reserve fund today versus how much we think we need to spend over the next 10 years, one second, Walt, we have about 15% of that money raised. Some of that is greens replacement, which we think are going to need to happen in the next 10 years. We don't have a real number on that because it changes, inflation and all that, but somewhere between 800,000 and 1.3 million is what the estimates we've been given. So that's not necessarily in a good place. Lake management, again, that one depends on what you want to do. If we all voted and said we want to dredge everything starting today, that's somewhere between 12 and $20 million. So we could do that if everyone was willing to write a $15,000 check. Great, let's get her done. But we don't have 12, $20 million. So Cecil and team have been trying to find ways to keep silt from coming in, and then innovative ways to maybe address the silt problem, so we don't have to get barges and big scoops and shovel stuff out that then has to go find a home somewhere else. ARF is in a much better place because of separating the golf course reserve fund. And once I redo the math based on the new road reserve fund, that number is going to get better. So when I was in Leslie's chair as the head of the Ways and Means, I came to the board twice. Giant red flag about ARF, we're going to go bust. So I think a lot of the work has helped. And now we have a lot more transparency on where the money is needed. I think ARF isn't great, but it's in dramatically better place that we, than it was. So I think we've talked about a lot of this. Interest of time, I'm going to move forward. This whole presentation and the recording is going to go out on Monday, so you can have access to this deck. And if you want to listen to my painful tones, you can do that as well. So we talked about a lot of this as well, right? So if we don't have money in the reserve fund, what do we do? Assessments, put things off, which like in your house, if you know you need a new roof and you don't pay for it, 5 years later, that cost is going to be a lot bigger. um, you know, some of these things are big ticket items. We've talked, $1 million for greens replacement, going up a little bit in dues is not going to help. And, if we're not replacing things, I mean, that was one of the big drivers for me on the road reserve fund is if someone comes here to look to buy a house and the road is, full of potholes and falling apart, their interest in Kiowa probably goes down pretty quickly. So I think that's, overall what we need to think about when we're doing some of this stuff. So from a POA board perspective, what are we doing? Again, continuing on, this kind of financial stewardship component, short-term expense, making sure we're doing the right things for the right reasons, and then planning for the future. Continue to focus on the reserve funds to make sure we have the money that we need going forward. The budget is not a secret. We held 3 budget sessions last year. They were open to everyone. So anyone that needs to see the detail in the budget, go to a budget session. They're usually in October, November. More than welcome. Last year, we had 2 sessions where there was a grand total of 0 people. I think one session had 8 people. So I know it's dry, but if you want to have questions about what's going on, that's a great way to learn. We're going to continue these sessions and discussions. We're going to continue the articles and constant contact and the communique. So the board and the POA is really trying hard to provide you all the information you want to help understand how these things are being done. We did our last reserve study with a third party 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So within the next couple of years, we'll have a third party come in and look at all our reserves and make suggestions on what we could do differently. Best practice is roughly every 5 years. And then what's your part? As we talk, stay engaged, read the materials, come to board meetings. If you want to go to a committee meeting, great. The budget meetings are open. Believe it or not, paying your dues on time, that obviously helps. As I said, we have less than a month of cash on hand. So if all of a sudden a big chunk of people don't pay their dues, and sometimes it happens, house goes in, is in probate, the estate has to get settled. Those things happen. But if you pay on time, that helps a lot. Obviously revenue in the lodge and using the facilities helps. Understand what's going on from a budget perspective. The treasurer's reports are great. I'm happy to talk to anyone at any time. As proven in here, there's all kinds of good questions out there. So please ask those questions. The other thing I ask is if you see something on Facebook or next door, might not always be right. It might not be the whole truth. So, instead of climbing onto that and say, yeah, right, maybe ask the question to Rich or me or a board member and say, well, what's really happening with this? And then, continue to understand what's going on with the reserves. All right, so we did a lot of Q&A from you to us. I'm going to start with Q&A that way first. So show of hands, was this session helpful, good use of your hour of time? All right, good. So the next question is a 3-parter. Was this information, I'm going to tell you the question and ask you to vote. Was this information too detailed, good amount of information, or too summary level? So too much, just right, or too little? So as I said, so I'm going to ask you in 3 parts. So first one, raise your hand if you think there was too much information here, you got lost, right? You thought that there was just the right amount of information in here, right? And then other people, there was too little, you knew all of this. Okay. All right. Well, that's fair. That's good. All right. So I mentioned the last question for me. So I mentioned the article series that's in the communicating constant contact. How many people in the room were aware that we were doing that and have read those stories? Okay, that's great. So working within the POA, we're going to find a place on the website to house all that information. So at any time you can go back and look at them all as we, as I said, next month's communique will be article number 7. I think we're going to do a retrospective. How's that for a word? Of the articles that we did up till now. So you can see it there. So I should have mentioned earlier, but the text that's in this yellow orange kind of font is the Kiowa vision, mission, and kind of the core values. So to me, what we voted on as a community and the board approved is this as a Kiowa kind of mission. So hopefully what you saw throughout this entire hour presentation is this is what we're trying to do. And again, this isn't, when I say POA, I don't mean Rich and his staff. I mean all of us as the property owners. Okay, I know we're over time, but is there any other last questions? All right. Well, that's very nice. But I would say it's the Ways and Means folks, Brent and Don and Bob and Clark, and now Leslie, those was really the driving force around all of that. And the whole impetus behind this was from the Ways and Means. And this is version number 27 of the presentation. So there's lots of feedback that went into this. Yes, sir, Don. Yeah, yeah. Oh, let's be fair. It wasn't zero. It was 0.018. So, but seriously, Bill Little, who just moved out of Kiowa, was one of the big drivers of the old investment committee with Clark Enright and Matt Saylor and a number of other folks started that, and then it rolled to Ways and Means. So, yeah, I mean, it's with the initiation fee, with focus on, how do we drive the appropriate amount of income from our investments without going into anything too risky, has made a huge difference. And you're right, it's cumulative, $1.5+ million that we wouldn't have had, that we would have to take out from somewhere else. Yes, ma'am. Yep. How about the third Monday at 6? You're in. Long range planning. We need some people. I'm the chair. All right. Dan Bush just volunteered. So now we have 2 new members. We need probably 2 more. So I think that's great. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I'll come talk to you. All right. So for me, thank you very much. I know there's a lot of things you could be doing this afternoon. It's a beautiful day, albeit a little windy. But you care enough about Kiowa and what we do, how we do it, to spend your time here and become educated or more educated. So I truly appreciate that. So on behalf of the board, on behalf of the POA, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.